Welcome back to The World Over. The elderly are one of the most vulnerable segments of society, and now physician-assisted euthanasia is on the rise. Here to discuss the threat is Director of Education at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, neuroscientist Father TAD PACHOLCZYK. Now, when I sat down with Father, Hurricane Harvey had just hit the Gulf Coast. Here's my interview with Father TAD. Father, in Hurricane Harvey, we saw those horrible images of elderly people in a care facility, and you saw the water rising around them. You and I, in a conversation, you mentioned that this set off alarm bells for you in the way that we treat the elderly outside of natural disasters.
Right. I mean, those images were really quite striking. And of course, those individuals were safely rescued, thanks be to God. They got a lot of attention because it was through Twitter and so on. Yeah. But people have noted that, look, the conditions in our nursing homes are not as great as we sometimes think. And we know of these rather well-publicized cases in some instances where there's even abuse of elders that occurs. And so, you know, it's always good for a family to recognize this potential and to make sure, for example, that they visit frequently, that they show up, that they interact with the caregivers. Because when all of this reduces itself to the level of a transaction, a financial transaction, a lot of times the care is not what you would really want it to be for your mom or your dad or your loved one.
No, I know stories from people, even if you're paying a lot of money, if you're not on the scene, if you're not an advocate for that elder in your care,
that's right.
You don't know what's happening.
You don't know what's happening, and when you roll into this, then a cultural shift in the direction of saying, well, in some cases for the elderly, it may be fair to offer them the option to take their own lives when disease states get advanced, you know, assisted suicide. Then you add that to the mix, and then younger caregivers, again, may not show the kind of respect that they should in caring for these very vulnerable individuals.
This brings up the question of what should the approach to the end of your life? Look, we're all going there eventually, you know, God willing. How should we prepare for that? Should we leave a life directive? Do you like the DNRs? What would you suggest?
You know, the preparation for end of life really should involve some planning where you have a discussion with the individual that you want to make the decisions for you. You need to have a live person in real time that you've designated, because I think a lot of people go into this misperception, and sometimes lawyers kind of push this. Oh, just have a living will. Just write everything down. Specify everything ahead of time. Try to imagine all the scenarios that are going to befall you. And of course you can't do that. And you write these living wills, and sometimes many years later, they just don't apply. They don't describe your situation at all. So that's, I think, the way that we should reorient our thinking is, do I want my son, do I want my daughter to be the one who makes these decisions when I'm incapacitated? You know, assuming that your spouse is not there. Of course, it should be your spouse in most instances. But making that designation and then pushing a little bit here to have the hard conversation. You know, I remember with my own dad having this conversation, how challenging it was. It was kind of, you know, rough at the beginning, but after a while it opened up, and he even was choosing, you know, which color vestments he wanted me to wear at his funeral and so on. So, you know, when you can break through a certain point of resistance, which we all have about death, I think it really facilitates that, and then you can, you know, have better prospects.
See, I'm the wrong person to talk to about this. I'm from New Orleans, and we, you know, death is like life. It's right there. It's on the same menu. And, you know, I know people literally, you know who you are, who built their own condos in death. I mean, the whole family has a plot. They've got a guard. You know, I mean,
I think it's a much more healthy attitude.
Well, in some ways it is. In some ways it's a little overkill. I mean, when they have, when you are designating and it's already built, shrubbery and walkways to your particular, I guess, perpetual condo, it's a little much. But though I have to admit, I have been looking into family crypts, so I'm guilty. Tell me for a moment about the insurance companies now, with so many states moving to assisted suicide and making this legal. How is the interaction between the state and now the insurance company really conspiring against the elderly?
Yeah, well, this is a great question. And I mean, you mentioned that there are states that are looking at doing this. You're right. There's about 6 of them that have it lined up to be, you know, debated and perhaps voted on. But of the 6, there's probably only 1 or 2 that are actually going to seriously consider making this legal. And you say, well, why? It seems like we've got a big wave of interest. Why is only 1 out of these 6 states likely to pass it? Because of what you said, that people are catching on. Look, sure, maybe you can talk about it as a choice at the end of life. Here I am dying and I want to have option this and option that.
Right.
Sounds real good, but the reality is that if the insurance companies are not going to pay for you to have all the options that you think you're going to have, various types of cancer treatments, some of which are more expensive than others, and they're going to say instead, well, it's only $1.20 to pay for the assisted suicide meds, and of course we'll be happy to cover that. What happens by implication? The more expensive procedures get pushed off the list of the insurance companies. And people don't want that. They really do want choices, you know, and so even if they're pro physician-assisted suicide, they're kind of backing off and saying, well, wait a minute, the insurance companies have too much to say here. We're giving them new options that they didn't have before by being able to reject our request for perfectly reasonable procedure.
No, even if you built the beautiful eternal condo, you want to go there in your own time.
That's
you don't
it.
want anybody sending you there too early.
Not too preliminary.
That's right. You're going to have a long time there. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about assisted suicide and euthanasia and its acceptance in Europe now. We had that case of the 19-year-old man. He was facing some neurological disorder and he hanged himself rather than pursue treatment or proceed on.
Exactly.
Tell me about that case.
Yeah, very interesting case. A young man, he had a neurodegenerative disease, so his nerves were misbehaving. He was starting to fall over. He was kind of losing control, and he was saying to himself, gee, am I going to end up in a wheelchair here? And I'm afraid of this. And he actually turned to his own mom and asked her whether she would assist him with ending his life. And at the same time, he was looking at this well-known Dignitas.
Dignitas, yeah.
Yes, it's an assisted suicide clinic in Switzerland. Many people have used their services, so to speak. And he was looking at that, you know, checking it out on the internet, thinking about it. His mom, of course, wouldn't assist him, and he kind of kept it then on the side and tried to look on the up and up, and then he eventually did take his own life. You know, it's a reminder to us of a number of things here that as the culture shifts direction, our young people are imbibing this very quickly. They're not oftentimes given the kinds of tools to approach questions of suffering in their own lives. So they feel like, well, gee, I got to get out of this, you know, before it gets too bad. And the internet, unfortunately, does serve as a powerful tool in this sometimes, both for good and for ill. And we can see the for ill side of this. So many of the pro-euthanasia, pro-assisted suicide groups have a very significant presence on the internet, you know, and really, I think, sway a lot of people to look into this more closely.
You know, it is a cultural question of the values that are upheld. And when we look at certain lives, they are diminished. There was that report that CBS News filed a few weeks ago about Iceland ridding themselves of the Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome. It's almost gone. Well, it was gone through selective abortion.
That's right. That's right.
So that's not quite addressing, you know, the causes of it or realizing and recognizing the gift and the dignity of these people.
Precisely. Now, a lot of scientists actually are working, for example, on the Down syndrome issue, and they have found things that you can give, for example, to mice who have Down syndrome that improve their neurological function, give them much better outcomes as they develop in the womb. And they're saying to themselves, you know, we hope there will be something like this for humans soon, where you could treat a baby that you know has this diagnosis. But you're right, there is a different angle that people immediately turn to, which is this, oh, gee, we can do the testing, and the testing will allow us to have an abortion, eliminate this individual. We don't want the child suffering too much. Putatively, it's in the name of compassion. And it's really, you know, a sad tale, because these children, for example, with Down syndrome, they bring huge blessings to their families. They're incredible. You know, they are so vibrant. They bring a kind of simplicity when they approach
purity.
things.
No,
Purity
and love.
and the way they
so
interact, you know, with us who are all more complicated and sophisticated. It's sometimes just, it's a gem to see that kind of simplicity, you know, in another fellow human being. They have no hesitations. You know, they just broach and come up to you out of the blue, and they'll start talking and so on. It's just, it's like a breath of fresh air. So we need this kind of beauty in our midst,
Yeah.
and not to be exterminating life. You know, I think the same thing, just to jump back to the assisted suicide, you know, the temptation is to say, well, let's terminate the patient rather than let's terminate the suffering of the patient. And we can't go there. I mean, those are two radically distinct proposals.
Yeah.
One is clearly bad, and the other is good, to eliminate the suffering, eliminate the pain. We have incredible tools in palliative care.
Yeah.
You know, this is a whole branch of medicine that is moving by leaps and bounds.
Well, I mean, we talk about end of life, when we talk about assisted suicide and dying with dignity, it is only rarely that mental disorders, depression is ever broached. And oftentimes, that's the root cause of so much of the desire to end one's life. It finds its roots many times in depression.
It certainly does. And I mean, this is an important point for those who are working in psychiatry, you know, which is its own science, really an important field, I think, to realize how we can help people in substantive ways who are struggling with depression, struggling with other issues, you know, that are driving them to devalue their own lives and to consider suicide. But the danger here is if we start to say, all right, it's okay for doctors to do this, you know, then it becomes, well, gee, you think jumping off this bridge might be okay? Well, check with your doctor to see whether it's, you know, and I mean, we can't let that kind of corruption of the medical profession occur. And in this same vein, I'm very concerned about the move that is afoot within the American Medical Association to change their stance to neutral about assisted suicide. If that happens, Raymond, it's going to be unleashing of the floodgates. The California Medical Association changed their position to neutral, and then California, after decades of battles where always they couldn't pass assisted suicide, it finally passed.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, the doctors are really important.
We'll keep our eyes on it. Thank you, Father Tad. For more on Father Tad PACHOLCZYK's work and to read his commentary, visit the National Catholic Bioethics Center website. They're at ncbcenter.org.